About a third of what you see is actually true. The second third, well, those events happen, but they're not depicted correctly. They've been dramatized. There's a lot of violence that's been added. The last third is just straight up make-believe Hollywood.
Narcos is easily one of the most popular shows on Netflix and one of the best rated shows of all time. It played a significant role in Netflix's boom, establishing it as the #1 streaming platform on the planet. However, it's a show riddled with inaccuracies. I've now interviewed Javier Pena once and Steve Murphy twice, and I've spent hundreds of hours preparing for both guests. And it sort of unintentionally made me highly knowledgeable on the topic. So today I'd like to discuss the most interesting things the show got wrong, why it chose to leave out certain information, and additional topics which weren't mentioned. Was Steve's cat really murdered? Was Steve really kidnapped by the Cali cartel? How nice was Pablo's self-made prison? And was Javier Pena a dirty cop? Let's find out. But before we do, let's talk about something no one knows about. What if I told you Netflix kinda hid one of Pablo's most evil traits, the age of his wife when he met her?
She's got a book out. I read it. At the end of the book, she admits that when they got married, I think he was 25, 26, that she was 13, and she admits that she had an abortion at 13 because he got her pregnant when she was 12. So on top of being a mass murderer, you know, the world's first narco-terrorist, the world's most wanted criminal, he's a pedophile.
Now, to be fair to Netflix, most of the events depicted happen in Pablo's 30s, where his wife would have been of age, but it's something that's never shown or talked about. The question is why? If you're trying to build this character as truly evil, why leave this out?
I've got a feeling that that may have been more acceptable in Colombia during that time. I don't know that. This is straight out speculation on my part.
Okay, this one might surprise you.
How important is this cat to you?
Okay, this is a quick one. Steve never even had a cat, so for you cat lovers out there, you can sleep easily tonight. Unfortunately, it's estimated that Pablo killed between 10 and 15,000 people in Colombia, not including Colombian police. Oh, and this number might actually be even higher.
One of his sicarios, a guy named Popeye, who was like the last remaining sicario who's dead now, claims the number is closer. He said that's now 50,000 people. And Popeye claims that he himself killed 300.
This one gave me a headache. Chronologically, the show is an absolute mess. For example, Javier Pena arrived in Colombia in 1988, while Steve arrived 3 years later after Pablo built his own prison. The show has him arriving significantly earlier, which is just incorrect. I could easily make a 2 to 5 hour video just on the chronological errors in the show, but that would be a super long and super boring video. So I'll just say this, a lot of things are not where they're supposed to be.
¿Saben quién soy? Yo soy el coronel Horacio Carrillo.
Carrillo is easily one of the best characters in the show. He's known as someone that is willing to do anything and everything to catch, but mostly kill the bad guys, even if that means crossing some moral and ethical boundaries to achieve those goals. Unfortunately, there's one problem.
There is no Colonel Carrillo. That was made up by Hollywood. He's not a real person. Because we get a lot of people saying, well, Colonel Carrillo did this. He killed those little kids. You know, he killed Gustavo, Pablo's cousin. No, he didn't. He's a fictitious character.
There's many characters that exist in the show, but not in real life. Cockroach and Lion are notables. Then there's characters that exist in real life, but not in the show. Pablo's brother, Roberto, was the co-founder and the accountant for the Medellin cartel, but received no mention in the show. Here's a crazy one. Pablo's prison, La Catedral, was actually even nicer in real life. Even with Netflix's massive budget, they couldn't recreate just how nice this prison was.
They do a really good job, but in real life, it's much nicer than what's depicted in Narcos.
And this is what Pablo calls a prison cell. Is that what you expect it to look like? You can see the microwave oven, the refrigerator, banana bar stools, color-coordinated draperies and upholstery. You come over here and look at this photograph. You see the artwork on the walls? These are million-dollar pieces of art. There's a famous artist in Colombia named Botero. That big one over the couch is a Botero original. You see the door up there? That goes into the second room of the suite. The bed is custom made, bigger than any king-size bed you've ever seen. You come down here, you see the fireplace.
Pablo even had a jacuzzi in the bathroom. Interestingly enough, Pablo also had figurines of Colombian national police officers on his desk, symbolically to show that he was in charge. These are people he had control of. Here's something I found fascinating that the show didn't bring up. Shortly after Pablo escaped prison, it was discovered that he had property next to the prison. He built luxury apartments into the mountains.
But on the side, he had bought all that land, and how we missed it, we missed it. He was building chalets. There were like apartments on the side, beautiful apartments, you know, and parties, and I mean, it was just, you know, and nobody ever discovered that. No one until we got to the prison. That we, right on the side, he had apartments. He had about 10, covered in camouflage, rustic. They're beautiful. A lot of foliage, a lot of greenery, a lot of flowers, the wood. I mean, this were like, I said, how did they build this? And my question is, how did they move all these refrigerators, stoves?
Obviously, very few people were involved in some of the tight conversations between cartel members and their families. A lot of the stuff from Pablo's perspective is heavily contested by his family. Many family members have gone on to write their own books, like Pablo's wife and Pablo Jr. Keep in mind, those books are also filled with lots of information that has been disputed. However, one part that the show got spot on from the cartel perspective was the use of taxi cabs. On the day of Pablo's death, the police that raided his apartment discovered a yellow cab parked in the garage. Pablo used these vehicles to freely travel around the city, similar to what's depicted in the show.
Kevin was a little slow afoot.
In the first episode, during a drug deal, Steve Murphy and Kevin Brady get into a shootout where Kevin gets killed. Although Kevin did get shot, he survived. Kevin is also upset about another aspect of that episode, specifically how he was portrayed.
Kevin was my partner. They show that he gets killed in Narcos, and he wasn't. Well, it made it a lot more exciting, though, didn't it? And here's the funny thing about Kevin. Kevin is a former Marine. He was in tip-top shape. In the show Narcos, they make him look like the overweight, dumpy guy. Well, he said, man, I always kicked your ass in the PT test, and here they make me out to be the fat, dumpy guy, you know?
I guess the question here is why? Why would they do that? Well, probably because they wanted the character playing Steve Murphy to be the star, and not to be outshined by any other supporting characters. Here's another interesting part about Steve's story, which he mentions in his book, but is not in Narcos.
But the significance of that plane coming out of Cuba and going back to Cuba, there was an U.S. military P-3 up tracking, and it proved that Cuba was being used as a transshipment point for Colombian cocaine coming into South Florida. My partner was, when he went to court, he was going to indict, believe it or not, Raul Castro, Fidel's brother. He got to the courthouse there in Miami, and it's where you get this was my first inkling of politics and bureaucracy. DEA, they got a phone call that said, listen, you're not indicting this guy, stand down. And it came from the White House. And Raul's never indicted, but it did go out public. It was released in the press. And this whole incident is documented in our book, Manhunters. The Castro brothers identified, I think it was 5 Cuban military people, one being a general, and they executed them, said they were the ones doing it.
Because of me and Pena, the Colombian government was sending in the army.
Overemphasizing Murphy's and Pena's roles. Although the show depicts Javier and Steve as these two badass DEA agents who were having rooftop gun battles and shootouts in Colombian streets, that really wasn't the case. Many days on the job were as boring as a typical 9 to 5, and they'll be the first ones to tell you they believe the Colombian National Police was the biggest player in most of these investigations. They say that at the end of every one of their shows and interviews.
We're not heroes. We're a couple of small-town country boys that became police officers and got to work the case of a lifetime. It was a case. When he died and the Medellin cartel went away, we moved on to the next case. The true heroes in this whole thing are the Colombian National Police.
Also, Steve Murphy was never kidnapped, and he wasn't present at the time of Pablo's death like depicted in the show. He was there after, though, to take some very important pictures that landed him in hot water.
When I get there that day, I ride out to the site after Pablo's been killed with Colonel Martinez. Again, I've got my camera. Turns out I have the only camera that worked that day until the autopsy people got there. When that photo hit Washington, I did catch some grief over it, because they weren't real happy. There's a DEA agent, and for whatever reason, I've got on a bright red polo shirt that day. Just makes you stick out like a sore thumb. All those pictures of his body, I took those pictures. I wasn't on the roof as it shows in the show Narcos. That's not true. I was back at the base. I rode out with Colonel Martinez afterwards.
All right, last one before we jump into Javier Pena. This one is absolutely crazy. Pablo Escobar had a plan to take out the President of the United States with a surface-to-air missile.
First President Bush was coming to Cartagena for some kind of summit, and they wanted to use that missile they thought they could knock out Air Force One with that. Well, there's 4 jets. There's 4 engines on Air Force One. They could have knocked one of the engines off and even part of a wing, but the thing's still going to fly.
Firstly, was he a bad guy or a guy that would break the law to get what he wanted?
Sometimes, like in Europe, when we do shows, it's like, sir, we know you were a dirty agent. How did you, the way I say, you know what? If I had been a dirty agent, I'd be getting out of prison right about now. And, I tell people I got promoted to the highest ranks of DEA, which is called Senior Executive Service position, which is the highest rank. We broke rules, we broke policies, but we never broke the law. All right. When I mean about that is, we did a lot of stuff going out with the police where we shouldn't have. I got involved. I had to arrest one of the traffickers.
Okay, Javier wasn't the lawbreaker as depicted in the show, but was he a ladies' man?
My character in the show, I was single in Colombia. I was, I tell people, I had girlfriends, I dated. Didn't date communists, I didn't date informants, I didn't, but, I was single.
One of the biggest inaccuracies is Javier's involvement in later seasons that focused on the Cali cartel.
Not hands-on. In the movie, they put me that I'm hands-on. I'm being more directive from the embassy, directing our troops, directing so that's that fallacy, right? But I was not hands-on. I was at the top, but giving orders, basically.
There is so much more to talk about. The show doesn't even mention Roberto Escobar or the man behind the car bombs, El Chopo. Pablo's reign of terror lasted over a decade, and it's almost impossible to cover the scope of differences between the show and real life in a 10 to 15 minute YouTube video. If you'd like to learn more about what happened in Colombia, I will leave the podcast I've done with Steve and Javier in the description down below.